pleasure to be here again. It is a pleasure to be out on the road again. I haven't been past Joann's Fabrics or the Lehigh Valley Mall in several years. Thank you for having me in Emmaus. Took me a while to figure out how am I going to get there. That's what I thought about all last night while I was supposed to be sleeping. How do I get to Emmaus without a lot of traffic? Try that one. Basically, personal history, what you're going to do is expand on the history that you have lived through. I am looking at an audience right now that I know if I mention November 22nd, 1963, I'm going to see heads nod up and down. You remember that date, don't you? And you remember it in your own way. If you were to go into a classroom today and look into a history book, you're going to see cut and dried, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. That's about it. Is that the way you remember it? Not in a million years. That's because we have a history book up here. We have a file cabinet up here with historical stories in, not just the things you find in books. I remember I was in Mrs. Nance Steele's room. Now, if I look at my report cards, I was supposed to be in Miss Ronimus's room. I was in second grade when it happened, but I remember being in first grade. The only thing I can figure out is the week before I was absent for the spelling test. So while they were going to go over the spelling test from the week before, I had to be out of the room to take that test. And so they put me in Mrs. Nance Steele's room. You know how kids are. Teacher walks out of the room, they become monkeys. They're all over the place. Well, I will tell you right now, Mrs. Burke, who was the secretary of the school, came to the door. And she went like this, and Mrs. Nance Steele went out. And there was this shocking horror of a gasp. No. And she said, I'll be back when I know more. Mrs. Nance Steele came into the room and said, children, I have to tell you, there has been an incident in Texas with the president. Somebody shot at him. They don't know any more details. She sat down at her desk. We continued to do what we were doing. Mrs. Burke came to the door once again, in tears. She called for Mrs. Nance Steele to come out. She must have called for all the teachers to come out. You could hear them all sobbing in the collective hallway. Mrs. Nance Steele came back to tell us that the president had died. You have to understand my age group. We like this president because he was a young man, much like our fathers, even though my father was older. He was a younger man. He had children in the White House that were very close to our age. At the end of the day, when the school usually vomits children, we all filed out quietly. The doors opened quietly. You hardly heard anything, and if you did hear anything, we were kind of whispering to each other, what's going to happen to Caroline and John? We walked home in silence. televisions of the day. Yes, I know a lot of people watch soap operas. My mother wasn't one of them. But I walked into the house to find the television on, which was highly unusual. And this is where something happened that I have figured this out. I don't know if you have, but our televisions were not like they are today. There was not a flat screen with 50 remotes. There were not cable channels, except for Lehighton. I'm sorry, we did. Okay, we had cable up in Lehighton. So instead of getting 3 channels, NBC, ABC, and CBS, we also got cable, TV 13, which was local. So we had 4 stations. Walked in and found the television on. The television was a piece of furniture with a screen about yay so big, which when you turned it on, you had to wait until the tubes warmed up. Yes. And television went off anywhere between 11 p.m. and midnight. Yes. The American flag came out, and they played the Star-Spangled Banner, and then the test pattern came on. Except for that weekend. If you really think about it, you could turn the television on any time during a 24-hour period, and there would be a camera trained on the coffin, Mrs. Kennedy, the rest of the Kennedy family, the transport to take here, there, or wherever. I remember on Sunday morning, I watched Lee Harvey Oswald get shot on live television. You could watch everything. Obviously today you can pretty well watch everything, but that was something for 1963. That is the weekend that they didn't shut the television off at midnight. And I remember that. You won't find my version in a history book. You won't find your version of that story in a history book. You're going to find President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Lee Harvey Oswald, yeah, later on he was shot. If you get more than a quarter page, that's what you're going to get. You have history books up here, and you need to share them. It is how you understand it. One of the best things to do, and I like to do this, I have mine with me tonight, is to write in a journal. Writing in a journal. You have a nice day. Do you know how you're going to write in that journal? You're going to write in that journal real nice. You can tell what kind of day you're having. If you have a bad day, anybody who reads that journal later on is going to know about it. Because you're going to be writing like this. And you're going to put punctuation in there. And you're going to put exclamation marks. People are going to know you had a bad day. People are going to know if you've had a good day. They can tell that even if you don't write in what your day is about, they will be able to tell. Why do I say you should keep a journal? Have you ever watched the History Channel? Ken Burns has marvelous documentaries. And how does he find the comments that people make? They are reading them out of journals. Journals that were written down. Sure, you can go on your computer. Sure, you can record them into something that has tape on it. Sure, you can record it onto something of a disc. I remember we had transistor radios when I was a child. How many transistor radios do you see now? I remember we had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. all that marvelous tape wrapped around two little wheels going like that. How many of those do you see around now? I remember records. And I remember record players. I remember 8-track tapes. I remember cassettes. And obviously, CDs. Do you find them now? No. How do you get your music? You're supposed to get it on your phone. Your phone that you're always looking at. Your phone that you're always listening to. Your phone that you're checking the weather. Your phone that you're taking pictures. You have a mini computer in your hands. But if that fails, who's going to read the comments from the journal? You can record it all you want, but you've seen how the process goes. Everything falls out of favor, and then it's not in the new format. If you write in a journal, people can read that. And there it is in front of you. And then Ken Burns can do a documentary on you. Isn't that nice? I actually became a grandmother. I didn't think I would ever become a grandmother. I have 3 boys. One isn't dating at all. One lives with me. He doesn't go out of the house except to take the dog out and go smoke a cigarette or something like that. The other one was dating. So my twins, when they turned 30, the girlfriend says, "We want to have a party." Oh, I said, that's nice. However, none of the family was invited. I thought that strange. Anyway, she says, "You have to get him out of the house." So I invited my twins to a restaurant. It was snowing that day. My sons know that I don't come out of the house and off the mountain in the snow. But I did. That should have been a big clue somewhere. So we went to eat, and I was told to make sure that he was back by a certain time for the party. You know, the one that we weren't invited to. So it ends up that I'm beginning to wrap things up when I got a text on my phone that says, "Stall a little bit. His friends aren't here yet." Stall a little bit. So I looked at my twins across the table and I said, "Well, which one of you are going to present me with grandchildren?" Of course, Marcus looked at me and said, "I'm not even dating." I said, "Okay." I looked at Lucas, he goes, "Oh. I'll tell you what," he said. "If the Eagles ever win the Super Bowl, you'll be a grandmother." So I started to go around and say to people, "How are the Eagles doing?" And they'd say, "Do you know what the Eagles are?" I said, "I think it's a sports team." They said, "Do you know what they do?" "Oh, I don't know, maybe football, maybe hockey, football, I think football." "Do you know where they're located?" I said, "I would imagine Philadelphia." They said, "Why are you interested? Because we know you hate sports. Why are you interested in the Eagles?" I said, "Well, if the Eagles ever win the Super Bowl, I'll be a grandmother." And everybody would say, "Ha, ha, 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 ha. You're never going to be a grandmother. They're never going to win the Super Bowl." Guess what? After he said that, they came into my place of work one time and they said, "You're going to be a grandmother." "Really? Now you wouldn't just say that to me, would you? You're not teasing me, are you?" "Nope, you're going to be a grandmother." I got up and I hugged him. I said, "Sorry about your team." He said, yeah, he said, you're going to be a grandmother even though they're not going to win. I said, I'm going to start praying. And I did, fervently. And guess what happened? The Eagles won the Super Bowl. Now, Peyton was born on December 17th, so obviously the Super Bowl hadn't happened yet, but he was watching an Eagles game in the hospital. And I said, they're going to win the Super Bowl. He said, you're just as nuts as the fans. I said, I'm telling you, I've been praying and they're going to win the Super Bowl. He said, why are you saying that? I said, because they're not taking my granddaughter away from me. I had 3 boys. It's my only chance to have a girl. And by darn it, the Eagles won the Super Bowl. I can thank the Eagles, and I know they are a football team now, for my granddaughter. And in 2020, I had another granddaughter. So I have 2 girls, 2 little princesses right now. I already figured out in my head, because I want to tell stories to my little girls of some of the strong women in their past, in my history. So I thought to myself, okay, you're going to be a grandmother. You can't be a mammy because that was my grandmother. You can't be a grandma because that was my mother. You can't be a nana because that was my mother-in-law. I remember being on vacation one time at Niagara Falls. Every time I heard, Mom, Mommy, Mom, 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 my son came up to me and said, whoa, you're going to break your neck. I said, it's what a mom does. They hear mom or mommy, they're going to turn. He said, okay. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, on this vacation, do not listen to mom. He said, we'll call you Mumsy. So every time I heard mom, I did not twist my head. I did not turn around. I left it go until I heard Mumsy. And I turned around and there was one of my children. Worked out well. And I thought to myself, you know, later on, if you ever become a grandmother, you could be Mumsy. So when I went down to the hospital to hold my very first granddaughter for the very first time, I said, Mumsy is here. And my son went. And like a week later, I went to the house. I said, Mumsy's here. He said, where did you get that? I said, you came up with it. What do you mean, he said. I said, on vacation at Niagara Falls. You didn't want me to break my neck. You said, we'll call you Mumsy. I figured that'd be good. He said, no, 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 no. He said, we're of German descent. I didn't know that, but he says we are. You're of German descent. He said, you're going to be an Oma. Yeah. And I went, M-U-M-S-Y. O-M-A. Oh yeah, Oma works. It's a lot shorter. Okay. So I am an Oma. Because when I want to tell these little girls about my grandmother, my mother, my mother-in-law, everybody will have a distinct name. I don't want to be saying Grandma Grace or Grandma Beatrice or Grandma this or Grandma that or Grandma Carrie. They're going to get confused, so many grandmas, because they have grandmothers as well. I'm not just the only grandmother. This way, when I talk about Mammy, that's my grandmother. I will be telling them stories about my grandmother. When I talk about Grandma, that's my mother. When I talk about Nana, that would be my husband's mother. That would be my mother-in-law. When I talk about Oma, it's all me. They can't get anybody confused. You have to understand, if you are going to pass some of your stories on to younger people, you need to make it relevant to the time period. Remember when I talked about the Kennedy assassination? Remember how I told you the televisions of today are not the televisions of your and my generation when we were young. Televisions were a big, huge piece of furniture with this little tiny screen. There was no such thing as a remote. You got up to turn the television on. You got up to fix the little lines in there. You got up to change the channels. You got up to change the volume. There was no remote. You have to let the young people know that. I know they'll pity you. Obviously they will pity you. No remote? Yeah, and there were only 3 channels. 3 channels? Yeah, no video games. Sorry, we didn't do that. My grandchildren, even my children, I got my children tricycles. They were so mad at me. All their little friends had these little trucks that had batteries in them. I want one of those. I said, go ride your tricycle. They pedal around on the tricycle, envying the kids in the Jeeps and the trucks, until the Jeeps and the trucks had to go get plugged in. And then they got carried into the house, they got plugged into the wall, and of course there sits the kids, no Jeeps, no trucks. My kids are going around on tricycles. And the kids with the Jeeps and the trucks are going, I want one of those. And the parents are going, you know what, that makes sense. I usually always try to get old-fashioned toys for the children. I got for Peyton this past Christmas an Etch-a-Sketch. She wanted to know where you could charge it. I'm sorry, honey, it doesn't come with a cord. It has 2 knobs. Well, she said, how do you turn it on? Honey, it's already on. Just turn the knobs. And she goes, oh, there's a line. Yes, there is. Now, once you make some lines on there, if you don't like them, you turn it upside down, you shake it, and she goes, oh, they're gone. I said, yeah, they are. And it doesn't have to be charged. You have to understand these children are now in the technology range. So in order for you to get your history across, you have to talk about your technology, which was basically none. Okay? We didn't have technology back in those days. Technology was a telephone that you dialed and you listened to it. The funny thing is, even as a baby, when Peyton would come over to my house, I had a Fisher-Price telephone. I know that their parents did not have a dial telephone in the house. Yet that child instinctively knew to dial it and pick it up and put it at her ear. And I'm like, you're so smart. You're gonna get far in this world because you're so smart. So life journaling, if you're going to write anything and you figured out that maybe some younger people will read that after you're gone, you might have to just write some things in there and say, well, when I was a child, this is the way it was, so that you can explain that whole technology, no technology thing. You have to be descriptive about the clothing you wore. Oh my. The 1960s and the 1970s come back, don't they? Fashion comes around to haunt you, doesn't it? They look at your photos in the yearbook and go, you mean you walked out in public and stuff like that? And I keep thinking, you mean you walk out in public and stuff that you're wearing right now? It just goes by that. You need to be descriptive about people and their clothing, what they wore, their mannerisms, the food, the way it was cooked, tastes and smells. The night my sister passed away, I was not able to carry her because I had had an operation. My mother had to carry her, but I did hold her hand and we went into the hospital. When we came home, you have to understand, my sister, when she was born, my sister never walked, she never talked, she ate baby food and wore diapers her entire life. She was handicapped. We took care of her. We did not put her in an institution. We took care of her. We were her caregivers. This is before Pampers. My mother was in cloth diapers for over 30 years. She ate baby food. The only way she could drink is my mother would make watered down Jell-O, and then as a little treat, she put a shell of ice cream over it. My sister had a certain smell. Jell-O, ice cream, and baby magic lotion. It was just something that I associated with my sister. When we came home from the hospital, I smelled my hands. They smelled like my sister. I knew I would never smell that smell again. I did not wash my hands that night. I waited until the next morning when the smell had dissipated because I knew I would never smell it again. There are smells that will trigger things like that for you. And it's okay to write that down in your journal. There are going to be things you write in your journal that may not be too nice. They're linked to grief. They're linked to anger. They're linked to heartache. Because not all your children are going to grow up and be nice to you. They're going to grow up and break your hearts. It happens. It happens. You keep thinking to yourself, I didn't raise them this way. I wasn't raised this way. But it happens. If you put everything all flowery in your journal, everybody's going to think, wow, she led a charmed life. Not all the time. Sometimes you have to put the painful stuff in your journal. You have to let those in the future know what you have gone through. And sometimes when you write those painful things in the journal, they can free you up a little bit. It's like a good cry. When you have a good cry, that's a cleansing thing. That cleanses your heart. So a good journal will have the good in it, it'll have the bad in it. Sometimes you might need to jumpstart your thoughts. I have a little treasure chest. I can open this up and pick something out, and I can give you a story behind it. This is a melted piece of metal. Isn't that cute? My brother brought this home one night, and while we ate supper, because we ate supper around the kitchen table, my brother brought it out and he said to my dad, do you know how hot a Bunsen burner gets? My dad said, well, not really. He said, well, it can melt money. I'm not sure, this is somewhere between like 55 and 67 cents. You have to understand my brother. My brother's a genius. He has all the brains. I don't. He can frankly have all the brains. Yeah. He's book smart, okay? I have the humor, the charm, the talent, the wit, the personality. I'm good looking and humble too. My brother can keep those brains. He has book smarts. He wanted to know how hot a Bunsen burner gets, and it gets hot enough to melt money. Never thinking with a little common sense This is not good, then the government doesn't like when you melt money. But this is melted money. They came back from lunch one time, they got into the lab, and they said, I wonder how hot a Bunsen burner gets. And they reached into their pockets and they put the money on the table and they used the Bunsen burner, and there it is. Melted United States currency. I don't know, maybe the government is looking for my brother somewhere. One time I went to get my driver's license. I had just a freshly minted cut for my hairdo. I used to have long hair, and I got my hair cut short. I went to get my picture taken, and I looked like a man. I looked like a truck driver. He said, how's that picture? I said, why, that's awful. He said, how come your eyes are unknown? I said, because they change. Oh, he said, you have hazel eyes. No. They change with whatever I have on. Sometimes they can be blue, sometimes they can be green, sometimes they can be bluish green or greenish gray or bluish gray. Oh, he says, you have dichromatic eyes. Excuse me? Dichromatic. They change. He says, I'm going to have to make a special card for you that says dichromatic eyes. Wait a minute. I'm going on a family vacation without my family to California. I went with another family. One of the greatest vacations ever. I said, I'm going to need this to get on the plane, and you're going to give me a separate piece of paper that says my eyes are dichromatic instead of unknown. Like, that's going to get me on the plane. I said, I want another license. He said, it's going to cost you $10. I said, I frankly don't care. I said, I'm going to come back when my hair grows out a little bit, and I want a good-looking picture. He said, it'll be $10. I said, I'll have $10 here, and if it's a really good-looking picture, I'll give you 20. I don't care. And I said, it's going to say dichromatic. Well, I had another picture taken. And you know what? It's good looking. If I could have, I would have got an 8 by 10. It was marvelous looking. And when they took my picture, you know, they only go to here. And I said, I have a beautiful pin on. Can you get the pin on? So he had to back the camera up. That's a good looking picture. I'm happy with that. And you know what? I would have given him $20. He said, no, it's only 10. I said, okay. But that one says dichromatic, and it's a good-looking picture. When we got to the airport, I said, isn't that a good-looking picture? That's a good-looking picture. I said, I went back for that one because it's a good-looking picture. These are the things that you can pass on. There's no problem with that. You can pass these on. You can have a little box with some mementos in, and they will give you a prompt. I do have prompts with me. They are one-line sentences. Something like, take us to church with you. Church is different today than it was when I went to church. I'm sorry, ladies, I think you'll understand this, but you wore a hat. And you wore gloves. And you didn't wear white after Labor Day. There was protocols to follow, okay? You don't have that today. You wore gloves, you had those little white socks that had lace around them and patent leather shoes. I hated patent leather shoes. You couldn't walk in patent leather shoes. They were like walking in blocks of concrete. They didn't move at all. When I went to school, I had to wear a dress. You couldn't wear pants in school. What did my mother put me in? A dress that tied around the waist with a big bow in the back. And then sometimes a crinoline petticoat. I know you guys are going, crinoline what? A crinoline petticoat. So when you sat down, the front of your skirt came up in your face. So you had to shove it under your desk. And when you went to the bathroom and you walked in and you sat down, when you got up, you were wringing out that bow in the back because it dipped down into the toilet. The first time I went to the bathroom in kindergarten, I walked in and I went to sit down and the seat moved. I thought I was going to fall into the toilet. It moves. It's going to drop me into the toilet. I stood there and I cried because I couldn't go pee. I was doomed. Somebody went outside and said, Miss Geisel, Kathy's in there crying because she can't go to the bathroom. So she came in and she said, what's the matter? I said, the seat moves. I'm going to fall in there. It's going to swallow me up. No, she said, no. Come here. She walked into the stall with me and she pushed on the seat and it went right down to the toilet. She said, that's all the further it goes. But watch what happens when you get up. When you get up, the seat comes up and the toilet flushes. All on its own. You didn't have to use the handle. I thought it was magic. I thought that was the most amazing. That was the technology of my day. Oh yeah, you just sat on that, it went down, and when you got up, whoosh. But I still walked up the steps, taking my bow and bringing it out. This is something that's not going to be in a history book. Yet, it's history. You don't see too many girls in crinoline skirts. If you do, they're in a dance studio. They don't go to school in crinoline skirts anymore. This is history. Sometimes you're going to have sadness in your history, but it's something everybody needs to know. The prompts that I have, if you wish, after I'm done, you may come up, and if I have enough, I'll give you a copy of them. First day of school, going to church, the first funeral you ever attended. Oh, do I have a good one for that? The lights went out. I was real little. And the lady that was in charge of the Junior Legion, she had died. It was an ice storm. My mother normally would never, ever let me leave the house in an ice storm in a car of girls with somebody driving. Do you know why she let me go? Because the man who was driving was the driver education teacher in school. So she trusted him. In an ice storm with a car full of little girls. And we lived on the heights, which means any way you see it, you have to go down a hill to get off and you have to come up a hill to get on. And my mother let me go. I always wondered about her judgment in thinking about that. The electrical lines coming over the mountain were downed. And so whenever they touched the ground, there was big blue arcs, like big gigantic lightning bolts of blue. And it would go, this is what we're driving through. We get to the funeral parlor, of course, there's no lights, only candles. We go in to pay our respects in the dark. It's the first dead person I ever saw in my life. And of course, it's all lit up by candles and blue arcs outside going, I'll tell you, took me a while before I ever went to another funeral after that. Kind of sticks with you. But these prompts will help you If you're going to write in a journal about some things that happened to you, these little prompts, you're going to say, oh yeah, I had something like that happen to me. And then you start writing. Just remember, writing doesn't go out of style. Writing isn't going to be put by the wayside like 8-track tapes or cassettes or reel-to-reel tapes. People can take those journals and they can get your history, because once you're gone, your history book is gone unless you have a journal with something in. You need to write down the stories of your life. You need to let the young people know that there was a store called Hess's. I need to let young people know there was a store called Bright's. You need to let them know there was Bennett's Candy Shop, and that's where you got your candy for the holidays. You need to let them know about your life. I took a workshop one time with a storyteller. His name is Donald Davis. He started out by saying, I'm not sure what to call this workshop. He said, but I figured out the working title is How to Kill Grandma. I said, okay, this is interesting. If Grandma dies, and everybody is so shocked that they can't talk about Grandma to the littlest one there, that little one is going to grow up never, ever hearing a story about Grandma. When that little one grows up to have children of her own, no Grandma is going to be mentioned, because that child has never heard about Grandma. And Grandma dies. You've killed off Grandma. But if Grandma dies and that little one starts hearing stories, do you remember the time she took her bike and she went across the Lehigh and Weisport Bridge, and the morning call photographer said, hey, look here, and she looked that way and she went flat out on the bridge? That little one is going to grow up, that when they have a little one, let me tell you about Grandma. I don't remember her because she had died when I was very little, but let me tell you some of the stories that I've heard. And guess what? Grandma lives. And Grandma keeps on living, generation after generation after generation, because we're all keeping Grandma alive through our stories. So, if you want to live on into the future, start telling your stories. If not, be quiet, because then you truly die. So I've been telling stories to my granddaughters. I show them pictures. There's Grandma. And I said, that was my mommy. I said, this is Mammy. That's her mommy. That would be my grandmother, just like I'm your grandmother. And eventually they pick it up and they understand. And it's the best way that you can continue your heritage and your life throughout the ages. So I hope I have helped you in learning to write your own history. You can add a little humor. Yes, you might shed a few tears, but it's all for the best and good, because it's going to perpetuate your history, which is up here, which will disappear when you disappear, and you want it to keep on going. So I thank you for having me here. Thank you for looking at my driver's license pictures. Like I said, this is the best one. It's a good looking one. Got me to California and back. Anybody have any questions? Well, then I guess I have explained myself. If you would like to, I have some prompts. It's a sheet of prompts. Just one-line sentences to help prompt you to write your story down. And I'm sure there's something in there that you're going to say, oh, whoa, yeah, I've done that. Like perhaps a night that your parents never found out about. Oh, yeah, we all have one of those, don't we? The funny thing is, they usually knew about it all along. They knew about it, they just didn't let on to you, that's all. But yeah, there's some really good prompts there. And I certainly do hope that you take from your fodder up here, from your history book, and write some things down so that your family can have them for generations to come. I thank you for having me come to Emmaus. It's been a pleasure. My friend Bonnie back there works with me at the library, and we have a young man that comes in. He is 6 or 7 years old. He comes in every Saturday. He didn't come in this past Saturday, I'm sorry. He was at a consignment auction with his father. But he's an absolutely adorable young man. And I have a sale that I run at the library. I fold books into trees, angels, sculptures. The other year I introduced gnomes. They are just too cute. And this past year I introduced fairies. The first time he came in, he had gone to kindergarten, and he came home and he told his parents, "They took us to a room today. It is filled with books. It's called the library." He said, "It's amazing. They only let us have one book." So his dad says, "You do realize that there's a library in town?" He said, "Do they have a room with books?" He said, "They have a whole building with books." And so he came in. He was absolutely amazed. And he comes in and he gets books all the time. And when he saw the trees and the angels and the gnomes, he'd say, "Dad, we need to get this for Memmy. Dad, Mom would love this one. Grammy would like this one. Aunt so-and-so would like this." His father dropped a lot of money at the library. He came in the one time, he said, "I really want this tree." "Oh," he said, "Levi, where are you going to put it?" "Oh, I would find a place." No, Levi." He said, "I don't think I have any more money. Nope, you can't buy it. I really wanted that. And it was just a rinky-dinky thing. So I walked up and I said, "Levi, you like the trees, don't you?" "Yes, Miss Kathy, I do. I love the trees. And I want to help the library." "You have helped the library an awful lot, Levi." I said, "I'll tell you what, that little one out there with the little colorful dots, it's a vintage Dennis the Menace book. You know what? Leave it there for somebody. I can sell it to somebody. I will make you your own tree, a very special tree." Okay, he said. They came up to check out their books, and I said, "Would you like it painted, or would you just like it plain?" "Painted," he said. I said, "What's your favorite color?" And he looked up at his dad, and he looked at me, and he looked up at his dad, and his dad said, "Tell her." He said, "Rainbow." Okay, all right. So I took a tree. It was what I call a belly tree. It didn't make it all the way around, so I filled the middle with some things. And then on the outside, I painted the rainbow colors. And then I looked through all my craft stuff, and the reds went there, and the oranges went there, and the yellows went there. It is a stunning tree. I can pat myself on the back. It's absolutely stunning. The next week when he came in, I gave it to him. His eyeballs almost popped. A little bit later in the mail, I got this card. It has trees on it. Inside, in rainbow writing, is a thank you note from a little boy who was 5 years old at the time. "Thank you, it is my favorite tree." And then he signed his name. He has stickers all over it, and there's a sticker of a cat in a flower pot, and he wrote on "meow." I was touched. I still have this card. I'm not getting rid of this card. When I die, I know my kids are going to go, what is this? This right here is my wonderful, heartwarming story of my buddy Levi. This young man is on the right course. He is. He's definitely on the right course. There are things that you're going to say, why do I want to remember that? Bar mitzvah of my nephew. I keep telling people about the bar mitzvah. I said, you have no idea what they fed you at that bar mitzvah. I thought they would give you some Jewish food. Not my brother and sister-in-law. And I keep trying to explain to people what we ate, and it was hard. In getting ready to prepare for this, I found it. We ate Reisstoffel. It is actually an Indonesian dish that is served in Holland. There is stuff there that there's no way I should have eaten. And most of it I didn't eat. My friend Bill went with me, and somehow he tucked all the food that he didn't want to eat under the rice. I thought it was amazing the way he did that. But you know what? We came away with a story called Reisstoffel. You can do that too. Like I said, a food, a smell. You can do that too. And it's something that needs to be done. And even though maybe you're not going to be around for it, somebody will thank you for it. Somebody will thank you for sharing your history. And I thank you for having me here tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Kathy. I know as she was talking to us and telling her stories, I'm thinking of all the stories that I could certainly start writing down. So I'm anxious to go and start trying a little bit of that as well. But there were so many things that she said tonight that I identified with. Maybe not the bow in the toilet. I don't think that ever happened to me, but quite a few things that about your family, about your children, about your different experiences. So hopefully all of you have gotten some ideas that you can take away and go home and write a few things down as well.